Hello, I'm the Angry Spork, taking issue with Wave 2 of Amalgam Comics. Boy, do we have some strange ones today. While the second go-around of merged Marvel and DC has seen some new faces as well as returning ones, more obscure combinations got a turn as well. Like our first book, melding Man-Thing with Man-Bat, let's take a look at Bat-Thing #1, and see if this comic makes us want to turn the page or turn our heads. The title features some squad cars, a couple dozen onlookers, as a motorcycle drops from the sky, and its rider is being carried off by the title creature. Wow. Jehovah's Witnesses are getting really aggressive these days.
The shocker you never expected to see.
That motorcyclist would not have saved money had he switched to Geico.
Written by Larry Hama, with art by Rodolfo DiMaggio, Bill Sinowich, I hope I pronounced that right, and Gloria Vasquez, we begin with a rainy night in Gotham, and apparently also smelly, as narration feels you need to know that odors from a fish market are intertwined with those of a sewage treatment plant. Fascinating. Police have found the body of a drug dealer, Huggy Maddox, all clawed up and burned with acid, leading one, Christine Montoya, to the conclusion that a certain winged monster was responsible. She's curious why a gangster that was more management than street soldier was armed.
Is it really that outlandish? Even if they're management, they're still criminals and don't only have to worry about law enforcement, but also rival operatives, or, since this is some version of Gotham City, probably any number of other criminals independent of their personal trade. And I feel like a cop should, think of that too.
And, okay, these bubbles feel kind of confusing. It's explained that Maddox was an associate of a Fat Freddy Fanelli, who the speaker says they sent to prison, and that Freddy considered himself a stone gangster, which I guess is supposed to explain why Maddox had a gun. Thing is, this explanation is attributed to Montoya, the cop that was raising the question in the first place, so it makes it appear as if she's answering her own question before asking another question to her stogie-smoking compatriot, Clark Bullock.
This is either a really weird progression of dialogue or misattributed word balloons, coming right after a peculiar reason to question why a crook had a gun. We're off to quite the start on this comic, aren't we, folks?
You put a load of 12-gauge buck into Fat Freddy's face, didn't you? Had to. He went for his biscuit, babe.
You shot him while he was having lunch? Did he not want to share his KFC with you or something? I mean, their biscuits are good, but I don't think they're shoot someone in the face good. Maybe.
Also, I guess I'll have to take this comic's word for it that cops have ever referred to a gun as a biscuit. Anyway, a shadow passes over them on a 2-page spread, and it seems their primary suspect stuck around the scene of the crime. They lose track of the beast, who may still be lurking around based on instinct, and Bullock leaves to tell Francie Ellen Salas her husband Kirk has resurfaced, while Montoya types up the report, something she apparently does all the time.
And you said you graduated from typing school.
I have trouble with this baseball.
As Bullock takes off, he's followed by some large-nosed individual with a speech impediment, as well as Bat-Thing. So I guess everyone stopped looking upward for a split second and he decided to just take off. At 4 a.m, Francie indeed gets an unexpected knock at the door. From her very human-looking husband, Kirk. They embrace as he apologizes for experimenting on himself in an attempt to halt a terminal case of ambiguous illness-itis. As they pull back, Francie is horrified to find he's turned into the creature again, and she screams.
Look, honey, I know it'll be an adjustment, but if I can learn to put down the toilet seat, I think you can get used to waking up to this every morning.
It was all a nightmare, one that she's had pretty frequently, and Francie's distress woke up her daughter, Kelly, who wonders when her dad is returning. Just as she tries to skirt around the topic of Daddy turned into a horror movie monster and had to leave for a while, there's a real knock at the real door. It's Bullock, and after putting the girl to bed, Francie insists to the cop that Kirk would never hurt either one of them, even if he's transformed. Bat-Thing watches from across the street as the debate wages on, with the detective hinting that his own family's history of abuse inspired his career in law enforcement. The man who followed him is making a call to a man named Scruggs, giving him the address he's at as we go to the police station. Montoya is called by the medical examiner, who found a photograph taped to the small of their dead gangster's back, a photo of Francie and Kelly leaving their apartment. When she sees a bulletin about a recent escapee, she ends the conversation to contact Bullock.
Wait, I didn't tell you about the restaurant flyer glued under his arm, or the dirty limerick tattooed on his butt. Who knows how many cases that information could solve?
Side note, the guy's name is Dr. Susumi, which I'm almost certain is a play on So-Sumi. I could be wrong, it could just be a wacky coincidence, but moving on. Bullock decides to check in with his partner, but left his radio in the car. Because he's so heavy, it chafes whenever he gets in. That's when Scruggs and another biker ride up, open fire, and Bullock is already hidden underneath the car? What?
Seriously, what? They've mentioned his weight problem a couple of times, and he didn't even open the car door before they started firing. Then all of a sudden he's just teleported beneath the car like it's no big deal? Is he also an amalgam of Flash and Mr. Fantastic too?
He empties his pistol, which he was never much of a good shot with anyway, I guess, and rolls out to the trunk in time for the assassins to give it another go. But now he has a mighty boomstick, with which he manages to hit both his assailants, even after taking 4 shots to the chest. But don't worry, he's wearing Kevlar.
Which, while it would protect him, isn't like being Superman. The bullets are prevented from being potentially fatal, but they still impact with force, and that energy has to go somewhere. People who have been shot while wearing body armor say it's like getting hit with a baseball bat or a sledgehammer, with bruising to prove it. That's not even getting to different calibers of ammunition. Though I'll grant this is something that's probably popped up a lot in a number of movies and TV shows over the years, so it's not as ludicrous as Bullock just suddenly appearing underneath his car.
My point being, he wouldn't be very spry or energetic after taking 4 hits like that, and I kinda doubt he'd be able to return fire so quickly. Unfortunately, while all this is going on, 2 other goons, Weed and Ratso, have busted into Francie's apartment, chasing her and Kelly, and since their home doesn't have a back door, it's not looking good for them. That's when Man-Bat soars across the street and crashes through a window, with Bullock presuming the transformed Doc is about to attack his family. The thugs open fire on the creature, but narration assures us that the bullets only temporarily displace the dead tissue of a genetic experiment gone awry. So does that make him a zombie too? Anyway, Ratso is taken out, possibly killed, so Weed makes a break for it. Bullock is loading his gun, as Montoya calls him, but he's bent on protecting Francie and Kelly, so doesn't stick around for the revelation she has in store. Wheezing up the staircase, because again, he's really out of shape, the last killer is sent over the edge. What's this, a suicidal biker convention?
No, that's been pushed back to next Monday. Scheduling conflict with a meeting of the overachieving arsonists of America.
Then he sees Bat Thing barreling towards him, so Harf, I mean Clark, opens fire. Not that it does any good. And it's a good thing it didn't do any good. Wait, what? Because the creature jumps over the detective and attacks the goon that tailed him earlier.
Bullock, I'll see you in hell!
The would-be assassin's curse is cut short by throttling claws of marsh muck and dead sinew.
Sheesh, and I thought Captain America was touchy about swearing.
With Bat Thing's acid touch around his throat, and narrated in a lot more complicated text than I think is necessary, this final goon dies the way he spoke. Excessive use of the letter S. For all who feel fear, burn at the touch of the Bat Thing.
Sometimes when we touch, the acid is too much, and I'm so afraid of you that I die.
Also, I don't know about anyone else that read this, but I'm getting some serious Reginald Vell Johnson vibes of this shot of Amalgam Bullock. Maybe it's my 90s upbringing that included Family Manners, Turner and Hooch, and cable-friendly cuts of Die Hard. Guy played a lot of cops. But back to the comic. The creature flies off into the night as backup arrives and Bullock tells them not to open fire. Montoya explains that Bat Thing actually had Bullock's back for a while, as the escapee report she noticed earlier was for Fat Freddy, who'd been on the lam for a month and a half and is a suspect in 3 bank robberies since, presumably accruing funds to hire killers to take Bullock out. The man pictured is indeed the one we've seen throughout the comic, but he doesn't look like Fat Freddy to Bullock.
Remember when they heavily implied that Bullock shot him in the face, something which would naturally make it very difficult to, break out of prison and rob a bunch of banks? Well, buckle up for some misdirection, people.
Turns out that shotgun blast mentioned earlier only messed up most of Freddy's face, but it was reconstructed by prison doctors. Buckshot screwed up his jaw, meaning no solid foods for half a year, so he dropped a lot of weight. He'd been tailing Bullock for a while, put a hit out on him, and figured that Mrs. Salas and her kid were somehow important to him, so decided they should be done away with for that alone. Clark thought he was protecting a mother and child from a mindless beast, but turns out he'd been putting them in danger without knowing it. Bat Thing, however, knew the cop was looking after his family, so protected him in kind. The comic ends with Kirk flying to a lab, apparently hidden in a nearby swamp, and decides to rest for a while Bullock is left to contemplate how much humanity may still reside in the supposed monster.
That was Bat Thing number 1. I've never been the biggest fan of Larry Hama. You can thank his run on Batman for that.
And while I don't think the story is entirely bad, there's a lot in the way that keeps me from saying it's pretty good. The thing about the Bulletproof Vest I can overlook, since it's kind of a common mistake in media, though I'm less forgiving of Bullock instantly appearing underneath his car. The narration was a little off in some cases, possibly inconsistent, and at times it was necessary, though it did get a little extra wordy when I don't think it needed to, though it's not the worst I've seen. We do get a good impression of Kirk's motivations, even if we never actually see him in human form outside of a dream. It wraps things up fairly well, and the misdirect was not bad, given that they never explicitly say that Freddy was killed when he was shot. That's an understandable assumption the reader is expected to make, to be surprised later, though the bounty on the cop's head kind of came out of nowhere. They did give some hints here and there, but I feel they could have given a bit more information to make it feel more earned and maintain some of the surprise. I guess you could say it's arguable whether or not Bullock would be informed about some cosmetic surgery on a guy he shot. I guess we're supposed to attribute that to him being lackadaisical when it comes to the paperwork. Though the more I think about it, the weirder it seems that Freddy had put a bounty on Bullock's head, and in the end he just tried killing the guy himself. Maybe he was tired of everyone else screwing up.
For one and done, this was definitely one of Hama's better stories. And I can't find anything really wrong with the art, so I can give this an easy recommendation. Not too high, but not too low either. Next up, we go fragging quackers as the mixture of the last Zarnian and an anthropomorphic waterfowl sees us checking out Lobo the Duck. And not just because that's who was teased for the next issue of Bat Thing in the letters page.
See? No foolies. Anyway, our next cover sees the title character in front of a cloud of smoke, armed, agitated, and standing over fallen Amalgam characters, or their gear in some cases.
Oddly enough, this is basically what Zack Snyder's reboot of DuckTales would have looked like.
Written by Al Grant, with art by Val Semix, Ray Crissing, and Francesco Ponzi, we open to a frazzled Lobo waking up, picking up his cigar, and realizing, oh yeah, I'm in the middle of a devastated New York City. Flames flicker where people networked. The rich men's towers are gone, as are the poor men's towers, though these guys were only relatively poor. They were still quite rich.
Flint-harped glom gold, the poor man's version of me. Which, to be fair, still makes him insanely rich.
Like, how many towers have you got?
Do DVD and CD towers count? Because, if they do...
He remembers that he was hired by the Offending Society to find out who was destroying the world one city at a time. They battled Green Skull and Thanocide, but they turned out to be pawns to a bigger evil. He spots Dr. Strangefate's helmet and finds him, Skulk, Vicky Valkyrie, and Hawk all dead. But that's okay, because he never liked them anyway.
Editorial mentalities that would become common with Dan Didio in charge of DC somehow make it into a 1997 comic.
However, the misproportioned misanthrope has a sense of honor, and since he was paid, he's determined to find the villain responsible. He finds a survivor in the rubble of a speech impediment center. Wow, Fat Freddy could have used that place. And asks who committed the destruction, and he responds, Kid Lay, whatever that means. Note how the Duck's companion, the impossible dog, spelled with a W because of course, is transforming into various DC or Marvel characters, I assume just for fun or spite continuity, or both. Lobo comes upon Super Soldier's shield as well as the images of Darkclaw and Spider-Boy burned into a wall, all Vesuvius-like. So the feathery mercenary goes to grab himself a beer.
To alcohol, the cause of and solution to all of life's problems.
As he leaves, he fails to notice 3 alien gangsters, one of whom exposits how their boss, Dr. Bongface, who appears to be some kind of puppet, is caged on the moon, but will be freed paradoxically thanks to the destruction of the city. In order to conquer the universe and get revenge on Lobo, he needs superhero corpses, for some reason.
Hey, I'm a simple henchman, not no criminal genius. All I ever did was become the youngest in my class to get a master's in nuclear engineering at Space MIT.
In an underground bar, that's literally underground because Lobo kept blowing the place up, the Duck is confronted by the hypermuscular Ambush the Lunatic, apparently after the same mysterious supervillain, and with a woman on each arm. Is he suggesting the guy eats ducks? In which case, shouldn't he be a little more concerned? Or is it that mallards on Lobo's planet are known to have terrible breath?
Is that racist?
Yes.
A little bit.
No.
As a warning to Lobo to stay out of his way, Ambush takes a daffy-looking dead bird from his trench coat and bites his head off. So I guess he does have mallard breath.
Avert those cutesy eyes, cutesy pies. Danged if I don't feel a certain murkish violence coming on.
The fowl then proceeds to thrash his bulkier opponent, including biting his arm off. Admittedly, some of that is ketchup. Some of that is ketchup. I guess he just ends up devouring Ambush in between panels because he's nowhere to be found as he wipes his bill with a napkin and puts saving the world on hold to get felt up by scantily clad ladies.
Whoa, if you must grope me, ladies, please, a little softer. Okay, now harder.
From here we go to high-tech Gravity Labs, where a pair of working-class stiffs address the reader, preparing us for their inevitable end as they're aware they're just props to show how evil the bad guys are. Right on cue, they're invaded by a group of goons all wearing the same outfit, demanding to know how to operate the gravity machine. I don't know, I swear! Please, don't shoot! I might have a wife and kids!
Okay, that's genuinely funny. And this is a time before so many other comedies were trying to be meta.
The possible family man, Ron, ends up getting face flambéed, and the other is defiant, knowing he only exists to be killed off anyway. So the goons decide to take him and the machine to their leader. Meanwhile, back at the bar, Lobo's little love fest is discovered by Beverleen, a woman he apparently pledged affection for and promised she could bear his ducklings.
Excuse me a moment. Moving on.
He tries to attribute this romantic betrayal to amnesia, but the Gem and the Holograms warrior princess here isn't having it, throwing him around before literally booting him out and saying to never return. Though, of course, she has a panel where she sheds a solitary tear, indicating mixed emotions about declaring hate for the Duck. Lobo, meanwhile, was fortunate enough to be kicked out with the Bad Dan's Guide to Supervillains. While there are a number of pun-tastic uses for the word kid, there's no Kid Lay. That's when he's met with 3 old acquaintances he thought were dead: Jonas Turnip, Gamorilla, and Billy the Millie. Jonas says he knows the big bad behind the city-by-city destruction of the universe, but before he can reveal it, he gets an arrow through his jaw by Daryl Rutabaga, his brother. They begin duking it out over the matter of who betrayed whom, So Lobo asks the ladies if Jonas ever named the bad guy to them. But it turns out he didn't, so suggests they do something I don't want to know the meaning of, and they take off to leave the siblings to destroy each other.
Considering how one of them just used the phrase, playing things close to the chest, I'm genuinely surprised they let that double entendre go. Or did they?
Beverleen shows up again, worried about Lobo and planning to forgive him, but since he's in the arms of another pair of women, and he's covered in their lipstick marks, she just wallops him again. Billy and Gamorla leave mid-thrashing, claiming Lobo was just so cute, and soon Bev leaves, with the Duck no closer to finding the main baddie. Figuring an amnesia block was used on him, he starts threatening his own reflection to remember what's been wiped from his brain. And it looks like it works. Meanwhile, a stadium full of goons, like we saw earlier, are gathered around their leader, Gold Kidney Lady, declaring that their destiny is to cleanse the kidneys of the world, because according to her, the root of all evil is poorly functioning kidneys. And they intend to use the machine they stole, the Graviton Inautometer, which is a lot more difficult to say than you'd think. Not sure where the stage is covered in letters and numbers, but it's the least nonsensical thing about this comic. Lobo arrives on his duck-themed cycle, having realized the survivor he talked to had a speech impediment, and he was trying to say kidney, not kid-lay, and that clue led to the organ-based despot. Weapons fires exchanged, with the bike set on autopilot as Lobo starts dealing with the kidnoids hand-to-hand. Gold Kidney Lady is determined to flush the impurities of the world, even to the point that a meat hook to the head barely slows her down. A barrage of bullets, on the other hand, seem to do the trick, until her body falls on the very lever she was headed for, activating the machine and pulling the moon rapidly closer to the Earth as the comic ends. Not sure what the moon has to do with kidneys, but whatever.
That was Lobo the Duck #1, and while it contained some material that I personally don't always care for, I think it was pretty alright. I mean, it was a satire all the way, so you can't take it that seriously, can you?
Because of this goofy nature, it can play a bit more fast and loose with continuity, even when as ambiguous and limited as the Amalgams. There seem to be a lot of references, some probably going over my head, but in particular are some Lobo the Duck adventures getting editors' captions pointing to Bat Thing Comics, a nod to how Howard the Duck had backup stories in Man Thing, which I admit I only know thanks to an installment of Casually Comics, a channel I do recommend you check out if you haven't already. Even some of the character designs get as outlandish as the story itself, from Lobo having one over-muscled arm and leg compared to their skinnier parallel limbs, to Jonas Turnip, who looks like if Captain Quark from the Ratchet & Clank series tried steroids and it went really, really wrong. It's a bit more cartoonishly graphic than the other Amalgams, and loaded with innuendo, for which tastes will of course vary. So while I wouldn't necessarily recommend it for kids, say under 10, it's hardly the worst offender in that regard.
If you can handle stuff like Rick and Morty or Archer, the humor and even some of the more graphic elements are pretty tame in this comic. Maybe the fact that there'd only ever be one issue worked in its favor. Next week, our look at Amalgam Comics comes to a close. I'm the Angry Spork, and man have I got issues.